Did you get my assignment that I emailed?
I did. I have not even opened it yet. I
No
am
worries.
incredibly busy, and I was just emailing your better half, and I had some technical issues. I just created a video, which I'll be talking about here in a little bit, that I would probably need her assistance with.
The PowerPoint for today was the new dad's one, right?
Yes. No, not the new dad's one. The kings and
princes.
The kings and princes. Yes. What we're doing today. I may be off. I think I'm new dad's is. I think I might have to need to do some work on that one.
Okay. Yeah, I only saw like 5 slides, so I didn't really look at it.
Okay, great. Let's see. I need to share my screen. Okay. We've got a couple minutes yet before we get started.
So do you have the options thing where there's 3 dots? Because if you do, you can go in there and it'll have meeting settings, and that's where you can turn on or off screen sharing for other people.
Okay.
That's
share, optimize.
on my phone, but as a computer, and I didn't check with the computer.
I'll figure that out. Thank you for pointing that out from the last class. Thanks, David. I will tell everybody as I'm getting started here that I do finally have a phone. A week and a half it's been, but I have a phone, and so I'm able to.
Hello?
Hello.
Hi, it's happening.
Thanks for joining us. I'll get started here in just a few minutes. But anyway, I wanted to let everybody know that I do have a phone now, and I do have some technology, and I'm able to, the importance of that is with the authentication, I can't access anything, my email, my MSU Denver without my cell phone. So it's been a challenge for the last week or so, week and a half, but I'm getting it figured out. So I just wanted everybody to know. Okay. So anyway, regarding grading for the Fathers and Fathering class, I'll have things kind of caught up in the next, I'm hoping by next week I'll have everything all pretty well in place. I have spent considerable amount of time working on this new presentation that I've given. I did a presentation that I'm happy to share it. I'm trying to figure it out. It's quite, it's a 45-minute presentation, and I want everybody to have access to it. It is the integrative healthcare for COVID-19, and it's a 45-minute PowerPoint lecture that I've provided, looking at some things that may be helpful for us with COVID. So look forward to that. I'll make sure that everybody has access to it. What I'm going to do is try to get it up on YouTube. I think that's the easiest way, so that I can get a YouTube link and put it into my YouTube channel, and it will be available for everybody. But in the meantime, if you're needing that, I will try to upload it.
There we go.
Just send me an email for it. So that will be available, and I'm really excited about it. I think I feel really proud of that. So there's that. Let's see. The other thing I want to say is, so for those of you that are in the Fathers and Fathering class today, I've invited a number of other people along with, because I think this is a really important topic, and I really like talking about this. And so there are a number of people outside of this. I want to tell you that this topic today, the idea of kings, princes, and exploring the father-son wound, is challenging. It's challenging for a lot of us men. And it may be challenging for you to hear some of this, and it may be challenging, maybe even later on as you think about something, it may bring some things up for you. And as it does, I want you to reach out to me, reach out to whoever, your resources, because I don't want it to just sit there and spin within you, but I want you to be able to explore. That's the whole point of this, is not just this information out there or to sit through some boring lecture, but to engage in this and to understand where are you in this process. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started here today. So my topic is the need for kings in the age of the prince. I have a bias or an opinion that we need more kings. And I'll talk about that in a moment. What is a king? What is a prince? And I have a feeling, a strong understanding that we have a lot of princes, but we need more leaders. We need more at the top. And what do I mean by that? So this is just about me. You all know that.
I think what you mean by that is just that we just can't all be lost. Someone has to.
We can't all be lost, and we can't all be boys. We can't all be boys. And I think that is, that's my opinion, is that there is a dearth of men who are have matured into fully realized men, who are able to step up, who are able to put their own self aside and to move into a different realm. And as I talk about that, my next slide. Oh, I love this one. This cartoon that I saw, attaboy, a firm grip, now let's go sanitize our hands. What's really interesting about this one, I had this cartoon in long before COVID, and but it sort of gets the idea of how we, that father-son relationship, or the older man, younger man relationship has evolved, and certainly plays a little bit on that. But what I really want to get to is this. So this is, as many of you who have studied with me, know my affinity for this model. This is a model that was developed by Bill Plotkin, and it can be found in his book, Nature and the Human Soul. It really helps to frame our understanding of our through life. And I like to use it because I think it's helpful for us to understand where some of the problems lie in boyhood, in transitioning to manhood, in elderhood, etc. So I'm going to go through this for just 1 second, so that you have an understanding of this. So he took this. This is not just a model he came up with. What he did is he studied indigenous cultures throughout the world, many different places, and he modeled this based on that. It created this one model that I think is really helpful. But the idea that we are born in many cultures, born in the east, like the sun coming up in the east. And then as we come in as innocent. We come in connected to mother. We have no sense of self. We only, when we separate from mother, is when we develop ego formation. and a sense of who we are, or a start to I am this, mother is this. Because mother sets me down, walks away, there must be something other. And so there's a very innocent quality about that that needs protection. That is the whole goal in early life, is of the parent, is that protection of the innocent. And that gets violated sometimes by exposure to the world, exposure to the stimulation of the world, by violence, by negligence, etc. That gets violated, and that has implications later on down the line. As we develop a stronger sense of who we are, we're able to then walk away from mom a little bit. We sneak away and take a couple of steps away, and then we come running back. We start to explore our garden. That garden is protected. It's a protected area. However, we start to explore the natural world. Who am I in relationship to other people, not just mom, but other people, the animals, the dog, the television, the trees. Who am I in relationship to the butterflies? Oh, they are something different, and that helps define who we are. So we start to explore our world, and a violation of that causes trouble for us down the line, because we don't get a sense of who we are in the bigger picture. A little bit later on, the stage called the thespian at the oasis. So the thespian at the oasis, a thespian, as you all know, is an actor. So this is the stage at which we start to try on, who am I in my peer group? Am I this? Am I this? I may want to try on that I am an athlete. I may want to try on that I am transgender. I may want to try on that I am a nerd, or a geek, or all those things that I know all of you had, you tried on. Am I the black hair, black dress, goth kind of kid? Am I a stoner, or whatever it is? We all try on various roles. We try on different personas, and that's really important for helping us to define who we are. If we don't get a chance to try those on, how do we know? And so so good parenting is really important. Good fathering helps us, I should say, compels us to allow our children to try on. Good fathering protects the innocent. Good fathering helps the child to explore and to try on these roles and say, yeah, okay, give it a try. What are you learning here? And that's really challenging as well. Then we enter the stage of the wanderer, where we have to wander away from mom and dad. We wander away from our culture. We wander away from that which we learned into a sense of, what is it that I believe? And that's important to do. So as a parent, as a father, it's really important that we let our children wander away. They need to wander. If they only adhere to what you told them, that's what you believe, etc., they never get a sense of who am I and what are my beliefs. You may be a vegetarian, but your child may say, that's not what I want to do. Okay? You may live on a farm, and your child says, I don't want to live on a farm. I don't like horses, as my son does. And so you have to be okay with that, and that is a challenge. From there, as we grow, in the lower cycle, the lower half of that cycle, we are growing our ego. We are growing a sense of self. And then is the initiation. Then we are called to something greater. We are called by our elders. We are called by the world to do something different. And we go through the dark time. We go through the dark night of the soul, if you will. We go through our initiation. In previous times, in indigenous cultures, they would take the boys out, remove them from the mother, and say, you have to go with us now. You're now with the men. Or you actually have to go wander in the woods for a while, whatever. We don't have that now, but I think that perhaps this period of time with COVID is helping to initiate, or is an opportunity, I should say, to initiate us into something greater, because we are being called. And that question is, who are we in the face of challenge? And so that is, that's what has to happen, is we have to cross over and be willing to say, this is who I am, this is what I believe in, and I can let go of ego, I can let go of self in order to do that which I am called to do. Okay, so that's I'm just continuing to explore to explain this wheel, and I'll show you where our problems then arise in terms of the king and the prince. So the next stage is that apprentice stage, which a young man learns, okay, I want to be a widget maker. That's who I am. That's who I'm called to be, as the widget maker. And so we apprentice with other widget makers so that we learn, who are we? Can I ask a question? Is the wind disturbing the sound?
Yeah, it is.
Great. I'm going to.
It's an unfortunate choice.
Yes, it is an unfortunate. It was beautiful outside, but I think I'm going to have to move. It's okay. We can adapt. Okay. So.
Sorry, I missed that. Could you say it again, please?
My phone is talking to me. I'm going to move to a different location. You're getting a tour.
I seem to be having trouble hearing you.
You're getting a tour of my house as we do this. Hang on. Okay. We adapt. Okay, so we're an apprentice, and that's an important stage at which we have decided. We realize, who am I in this world, and what are my gifts? And that's, that gift, as I said, may be widget maker, it may be bread baker, it may be teacher, it may be healer, it may be whatever, okay? And so it helps to have someone, a king, if you will, to help us to make sense of our journey, our wandering, so that we have a clear idea, who am I, and what path do I want to follow to getting there. So that's an important, so without that, we don't necessarily get into the apprenticeship that we need to get into. Now, I'm going to continue on and I'll come back. So after the apprentice, I'm a widget maker, or I'm a bread baker, and I've learned to make a white loaf, and I've made 1,000 white loaves of bread. And then I say, hey, you know what? What if I would add some chia seed? What if I would add some flaxseed? What if I would twist the bread in a weird combination, and I become an artist? I start to do that which is a little bit innovative, because again, it comes from within me, because someone allowed and said, you don't have to make, how about trying to do something that you want to do as a bread maker? Okay, make the widget that you want to make, so that it's encouraged to go our separate path and doing that. That is the artisan. And then once we reach a certain level of quality of what we're doing, we crown, we become the king, we become at the top, and that is the master. That is now the master, who then doesn't necessarily make the bread, but who helps those bread makers become good bread makers. That's the goal of the master. That's the goal of the king. The king says, it's not so much me ruling here as much as me overseeing you, letting go of my own idea of what should happen and helping you to come up. And then finally, the stage when we start to let go, when we realize I've achieved, I've crowned, I've reached the top, and now it's time for me to step back, in the stage of later elderhood, of the sage in the mountain cave, where I like to call this the stage of the fool. He doesn't play by the rules. He doesn't need the rules any longer. This person doesn't need the rules because they've done it. They no longer need to play by, and therefore they are becoming they're a little bit more free. And that is healthy adulthood, no longer having to play by the rules and being able to be free to be something else for those earlier in the cycle. Okay, so our issue and the whole point of this conversation that I'm bringing up, this whole point of this wheel, is that we have so many here in the wandering stage that never get help because we have so few up here. True kings. We don't have enough kings to help our young men and women, but here I'm talking about men mostly today, but it's true for anybody. We have very few fathers who pull the adolescents up and to help them to find who they are and to find that path. Does that make sense? So let's move into our topic for today then. So there are some, I looked at some research on this. I found this interesting. This idea of the question of, are we delaying delayed adulthood, delayed desistance, trends in the age of distribution of problem behaviors, where they actually looked and because I thought, well, maybe it would be important to see if there's some research on this. Is this really true, or is this some concept that I have? Are people delaying, and what are the implications from the transitioning from that adolescent stage into adulthood? Current research finds that biological effects are dependent on social and environmental context, that psychological and neurologic development is contingent on both experience and biology. Most people are taking longer to go through the full set of transition into adult roles. Some are delaying marriage, parenthood indefinitely, but in their study, they looked at violent death, crime, and substance abuse as measures of adolescent behavior. And what they said was that they're not, the lengthening span of adult transitions has not produced a drift toward later age in the prevalence of problem behaviors. So in other words, they don't see that while we are delaying adolescence, they don't see that we are carrying those through into adulthood. However, my problem with this is I don't think it's a good measure of becoming an adult. Just because you don't have, you're not ending in violent death, that you are not substance abusing, or that you're not involved with crime, doesn't mean that you are truly reaching your full potential as an adult. So I think they looked at the extreme, but I don't think that they looked at, let's see if I can go back here a second. They didn't look at self-actualizing. They didn't look at our people following their true sense of self. I don't think that they really had an understanding of what patho-adolescence really looks like. And so I had a little bit of an issue with their conclusion in this study. So let's look at the prince. The prince is the unripened king. He is Robin of Locksley, who will one day take over his father's reputation for fairness and virtue. So he will one day become the king as Robin Hood, and discover his own power in Sherwood Forest. Again, this is a mythological metaphor for what might be happening. So he's waiting for the father to teach him maturation from naive and grandiose prince, because as the prince, it's all about him. He is still in ego. It's still all about him. And that's appropriate. Young men should have strong egos. We want ego, but at some point we teach them it's okay to let go, because you now know who you are. You don't, ego carried you, but ego is not you. So he is grandiose and he is naive. And so we're hoping someday he will become that ordered king, that one who oversees. The prince within gives way to the king, thereby replacing his father at the center of masculinity over time, in the process of becoming. However, he's still the prince at this point. He pseudo orders his king. He plays. He's in charge in make believe with his friends. He's tries on that role of becoming the king. He orders his make believe friends, his animals, his whatever, and he plays with the idea, but he's still naive. It's very difficult to separate his own issues from his guidance of others. In other words, it's still about him. It's still about him and his own issues. And in that way, that hinders his ability to be kingly and to set that aside and to think about others. He wants to appear to have integrity, but he feels like an imposter amongst men. That's a very common feeling of men in general, men and women. We feel like imposters, and we're not really sure. And I think this is partially this stage. This is an important one here. This idea of feeding chaos rather than stabilizing it. This is the difference between the king and the prince. The king, the prince creates chaos. He wants to try, and in doing so, it's chaotic. And that's necessary, but it is challenging. It is challenging for those around him. And to trust that that is the case is important, but to understand the difference that he's not the king. He is just apprenticing. He is trying. Because of the heat of his passions, yes, that gets us into trouble, does it not? Those things that which we have a lot of fire for cause us trouble. Or because he is withdrawn and he is held back, that's a problem as well. Untested of his own abilities, he's also very envious. And that envy can really cause him to get into some bad places. So this is the prince, okay? Any questions so far about the prince? Y'all still there?
Yep.
Okay, great.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good. All right. So let's talk about the king now. The king. So Joseph Palomar says, to understand the role of the king is to understand the nature of things before he orders them. This is a good leader who understands before directing, who listens. That's how we understand. We perceive, we listen with our ears, with our eyes, with all of our senses, trying to understand a situation before just going in and controlling, before making a decision. That's really interesting. Think about our kings in our world. Are they doing so? Are they listening before ordering? Who are your role models as kings? Guiding force which makes cosmos out of chaos. I love that one. I love that one. So the prince is all about the chaos. The king's job is to make order, to create calmness, to create truth, to help, not create truth, but to discern the truth, rather than this chaos that happens as a result, or in childhood, in adolescence. Comes out of being more than doing. The king no longer has to do. It's who he is. Remember, in the various stages, he's no longer the apprentice or the artisan. He just is. He doesn't have the outer to protect him. Order, reasoning, rational patterning, stabilizes chaotic emotion, bringing calm. Wow. Okay. Truth telling here. This is really challenging. This is really challenging to calm chaos, calm emotion, rather than create and feed that emotion. That's a really challenging task for the king, and a really important one. And again, it's a measure of, do your kings, those who you think are kings, are they calming chaos? Because if they're not, there's still a need that they're trying to fulfill. A firm but kind eye. So they know what it comes from the inside. They know, but they do so kindly. They disciplined with kindness. And they're not envious. They're not envious because they don't need to be. They know who they are. They are secure in who they are. Therefore, they do not need to, they're less influenced by others. Okay, so this is the king. You'll understand now, seeing the difference between the king and the prince. Okay. Let's look here. The king sees others in all their weakness and all their worth. So sees the whole, sees the yin and the yang. This is the king. Prince can't do that yet. And it's important to point out, it's not the prince's fault because he's the prince. He just is the prince. Okay? So we're not saying he shouldn't be. That's where he is. But the problem when we look at it from a sociological perspective is we don't have kings to help those princes to become kings. That's where we're missing. It therefore guides and nurtures them toward their fullness of being. Yeah. This is a good one. When one has not had a good father, one must create one. So, what happens if we don't have a good father? If there isn't a king for us to help us?
I think
go ahead. Yeah.
I think at one point in our lives we become capable of fathering ourselves.
That's the goal.
So that we do become our own kings.
That's the goal of therapy. That is the goal of our teachers. That is the goal of mentors. Of course, we need mentors. The best way is for mentors, male mentors for young men, female mentors for young women. And we can cross those lines as well. But we need, it's really important. But at some point, what we realize is, I'm no longer going to get from my father. I'm no longer going to get from my mother. You realize they have done their job, and now I have to do so. I have to king me, if you will. I have to become that. And I have to use whatever is out there. For example, this chaos that we have going right now in terms of the pandemic. Perhaps the initiation that takes place is our understanding of who we are in the face of challenge. When we go out to fight in the deep dark woods, fight the dragons, we realize what our strengths are. And that's perhaps the best thing when we are faced with difficulty. Disease is a great teacher. And we can use disease as a great initiator towards moving through disease, moving through it, rising up, and figuring out, who am I in the face of this? I really encourage that. I become mortal by having a child. Isn't that the truth? I think that's the hardest thing about being a father, is our child. It is a mirror. It is a mirror that is being held up to us. And that is a challenge, to look in that mirror. We become mortal. It is no longer theoretical. It is real. And by having a child, one does get real. And I become mortal by having a father. In the same way, the role of the father should be to help us to be settled in who we are. This is my son, if you didn't know. My son and my partner and my son. The prince gives kindness when firmness is needed. an unclear aggression. I use the word unclear. I couldn't think, I didn't know how to say that in a different word. Unskilled aggression, just uses aggression when we really need to be kind, when we need to be receptive, when we need to step back. A prince doesn't have that ability. So he may be soft when he needs to be firm, and he may be too firm when he needs to be soft. He doesn't know it yet. And that's okay. It's just we're hoping to move him through that. Okay. Now, the wounding. What happens? So the outlaw father. When we talk about an outlaw, we're talking about somebody who breaks the boundaries. Somebody who crosses the law. The law is the rule. The outlaw father then breaks the boundary. He either does that by creating intolerable distance. He doesn't have a relationship with the son. He is not close enough, creating a wound in that child because that child doesn't get what he needs from the father. And remember that I use father broadly, father complex. That can be a male or a female playing the role of what a father serves, as I've talked about in other classes. Aggression and abuse. So crossing the boundary to be too aggressive, to be abusive, to be full of rage. Crossing the boundaries. To be too demanding. To be too demanding to, and therefore this is not necessarily, this could be called the outlaw king, but I don't think it's really necessarily kingly because it is a prince disguised as a king. Because if he is too demanding, he's not necessarily allowing. So that results in the child doesn't know his or her own destiny. They cannot rise. If there is this intolerable distance, if there's too much distance, how does a child know? The child doesn't go through that cycle as I just talked about, the wheel. If there's too much abuse and aggression, a child can't get angry. Are you kidding? When a child feels angry, which is a natural human emotion, oh no, not with an abusive one. Don't you dare. You'll get stopped real quick. And therefore, I cannot rise because I am oppressed. When there is demand, when there's too much demand, there's a strong pressure to be perfect. Too much demand to be something. And therefore can't make mistakes. A great tragedy. The father needs to allow mistakes. The father needs to show mistakes, as I talked about last week when I talked about father roles, and the need to show children failure, how to fail. Okay, so the wounding there is the child will never act. They don't act. The results in they don't act. They don't act because they have a fear of making a mistake. The opposite would be the diminished father. So this is not the outlaw who actually crosses the boundary. This is the diminished father who's pulled away in. Okay, again, not king. He still needs to make, this is the prince in dressed as the king. We have a lot of men out there who look like mature men, but they are wounded. They are wounded. They are the outlaw or they are diminished. They're too small. They're hiding. They're hiding behind games. They're hiding behind play. They're hiding excessively. We should all have some ability to play, but excessively stuck in play. No ability to discipline. It takes strength to discipline firmly, to provide boundary and to say, this is it right here. Because you know right from wrong. Okay? But also, as somebody was pointed out earlier this week in the online men's group. In the online men's group, which, by the way, I'm open to, if anybody's interested, joining the online men's group, we'd certainly welcome you. But somebody pointed out the 38 special song, Hold On Loosely. Hold on loosely, but don't let go. If you cling too tightly, you're going to let it blow. I believe that's how it goes. The idea that we do need to hold on.
Control.
We lose control. Thank you. Yes, we're going to lose control. Thanks, Matthew. I think that was you. That there needs to be boundary. The boundary can be a little bit flexible, but we do need to provide that. And the diminished father doesn't do that. He's too afraid. He's too afraid. Thinking about some of the roles we talked about, the bumbling father, the sort of silly, he wants to play with his children, but he doesn't want to set a boundary. This is a little bit of a problem here. No visionary strength. The diminished father doesn't have a sense of who he is and what his goal is for the kingdom, the family. And therefore he abandons. He just doesn't step up, or he's off in his addictions, off in his wandering, but not living purpose. That results for the child in no clear sense of self. If you don't know the boundaries, you don't know what defines you. Me from you there's a boundary. What are my beliefs versus your beliefs? I can only define my beliefs by your beliefs. Your meaning other. Traditions. What are my traditions? There's no conviction, no commitment. Looks to mother, still attached to mother. The father, the role of father, and I don't mean this male, female, etc. As I've talked about in the past, I want to continue to emphasize that. It is separation from that which is mother, which is protective, which is the one that holds us in the innocent, in that first stage, who holds us, who creates the boundary in the garden. And then the father's job then to pull the child away. We have to separate from mother. Our biggest wounds are that we don't separate from mother appropriately, and we don't attach to father appropriately. I've talked about this in some of my other classes, but I want to just emphasize that just a little bit, that sometimes we ask little boys to become men too early, therefore ripping them away from mother too soon. And oftentimes what we'll see is that the child binds back very strongly with mother and then therefore does not let go of mother. But it's appropriate to separate from mother at some point, and a strong father helps with compassion a boy to do so, a child to do so. If the father is diminished by work, he becomes fraudulent and seeks to acquire, to gain in some way, because he is not motivated and enhanced by his work. His work isn't about him. It is something that is done to him, and therefore the child then suffers as a result of inauthenticity. There's a fraudulence. If diminished by loss of essentiality in the family, so oftentimes fathers feel, as I talked about last week, remember how I talked about how one of the issues with fathers is they don't feel necessarily a part of the family. They feel like they are the outside. They don't get the inside joke. And that's a real hardship. And so if they're diminished by that, then they will be on the outside and they will stay outside. of the circle. They find their needs elsewhere. They wander elsewhere. They have infidelity. Their allegiance is to work. Their allegiance is to going out on their own journeys, constantly playing with their friends and doing stuff, but not necessarily because they don't feel part of. This is a diminished father. Okay? Hunger for the king, too little father, a distrust of old men. We see that in Dead Poet Society, Lawrence of Arabia, for example. Not necessarily trusting older men. Temperament without teaching. We talked about this. The father comes home and he doesn't connect with the family. He rather just provides a temperament. Hollers, screams, whatever. There's a great episode of The Wonder Years. It's early on in season 1, if anybody can find it at some point, where the whole episode is about the temperament of the father, rather and what the father, his expression of his stressors, which comes out on the family. And great episode. I'd love to find that. The need for the sacred king. So we all need someone, a leader to believe in, a mentor, if you will. And so it's really interesting. I think that we have obsessions with royalty, with celebrities. What's Prince, whatever his name is, doing, or what are all these celebrities doing? What I think we get sort of fascinated by that, because it really represents we have a strong need for a king, for a leader, a healthy leader. So the wound versus the sacred wound, I think I want to talk about wounding versus sacred wounding. Sacred wounding, meaning there is a purposeful boundary, so that there is a, sometimes we hit against that boundary pretty darn hard. And that's a sacred wound. That's appropriate. That wound then is transformative. It helps us to become. When we face challenges that are really, really painful, when we get embarrassed, when we get disciplined appropriately, it ain't easy, but it's a sacred wound. Versus a pure, immature wounding, pointless damage, where it's stagnated. We don't get anything from it. It weakens us. That's not the kind of wounding that we need. We need wounding that is a boundary that the child bumps up against, and they bump up against and it hurts, and then they go, oh, wait a second, maybe I need to figure this out here. Okay, something that strengthens them, and that you talk to that child and say, here's how, here's what we learned from this. Not simply, boom, stop, but rather, hey, boom, but let's talk about it. That's sacred wounding. Our golden boy. We see a lot of golden boys in the world here. You all know them. These are those boys that want to rise up. They become the golden boy. They want to be seen. They want to be famous. They want to be celebrities. They want everybody to see them on Instagram. They want everybody, all these guys with shirts off on Instagram, look at me. I'm talking about nutrition here. I'm a nutrition expert and my shirt is off. This is the golden boy. It's all about look at me, look at me, look at me. This is the prince, okay? Give me some examples of boys who have risen to the top, albeit too quickly. And they fight to stay there, but they can't.
Macaulay Culkin.
Yeah.
As a child, he, as being a child actor, he got a lot of fame very quickly. But when the cuteness of the kid wore off and he became an adolescent, he wasn't getting any movie roles or the attention. And so now as an adult, he's really struggling with his life.
Yes. Thank you. That's a great example. When we look at child actors, this is the case. Look at Justin Bieber, right? He was an example. He was He was on Mickey Mouse Club, I believe, wasn't he? With Brittany, who was another one. They rose too fast without grounding, and therefore they fall, not rooted. Yeah, they child stars, it's that way. It's too much. Look at Michael Jackson. Now, Michael Jackson was able, in some ways, we could look and say, and justify and say, he was able to rise. He was able to mature with it, but he was also, in many ways, an eternal boy. Neverland. Give me another example.
I kind of know one, but he did go from a golden boy to becoming a king. So it was actually he was actually successful in doing that.
Okay.
David Goggins is one. That
Okay.
was a golden boy at one point,
All
but
right.
he succeeded.
He fell down.
He felt he made himself fall down on purpose. That he was looking for something, but he actually did find it.
Yeah.
And became essentially a man.
Because catabasis, to descend into the underworld, to eat ashes, to do the low work, to fall down. Richard Rohr has a terrific book out there, Falling Upward. He says the path up is down. If we try to rise, if you try to be golden too quickly, what's going to happen is you are going to fall. The correct path is that we start work not as a millionaire, not as a $200,000 job when you're really young, but maybe you got to work at McDonald's. Maybe you got to deliver newspapers. Maybe you got to eat ashes. You got to do the low work. This is catabasis. And then you rise. I like to talk about this one. I want to come back to this. Because the greatest teachers, whether it's Buddha, whether it's Jesus, or whether it's nature itself, says that the way to grow and get bigger is by dying. Parts of us die. We rise up because we first die. It's Easter this week. And the Paschal Mystery teaches us all about that in the Christian tradition, but you can find it in all traditions, that the way up is downward, and that we don't rise up, but are risen by our kings who pull us up. And it's really difficult. It's not only difficult, it's not a conscious choice. We are risen by our challenges, by death around us, by disease, by challenges in our life. That's how we are risen up, but not by simply say, I'm going to become big. It doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. And it ends in tragedy too often because it's too naive. Stepping into the unknown. The desire for safety stands against every great and noble enterprise. Yep. This is the one that when we're still stuck to mom, I want safety. Mom is safety. Mom meaning the mother complex, that which held us in innocence in the early parts of life. We have to leave. And we need father energy, king energy to pull us away and to say, yeah, I understand that it's really safe there in the harbor. It's safe where there is a known place to get your food. But guess what? Time to leave. The healthy king might say, guess what? You're out on your own. You find your own apartment. You find your own way. Here's a ticket. Travel. That's healthy king versus the wounded king who beats the child up for, or psychologically or physically, for exploring, for going out on his own. You're never going to amount to anything. Who do you think you are to step beyond us? You think you're better than me? This is not king. This is a prince trying to raise a prince. Essential message. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. for several reasons. One is it gets too long, and it gets more than what we can talk about here today. But more than that, it's never wise to tell people the answers. The messages that we get in initiation have to come from experience, not from somebody telling us. And to say, "Oh, I know the messages I know now, so I'm fully matured. I'm fully become a king." Nah, it happens via life lessons. However, important to just maybe mention that we learn life is hard. Life is hard because there is death, and there are viruses, and there are diseases, and we fall down. And I get up and I fall down again. And there are people who don't like me. Life is hard. Are not that important. Wow. My name will not be remembered in time. Wow. As a boy, as the prince, I'm sure I'm going to be remembered. That's my whole goal, is to be remembered, until we realize, no, it's not that important. And I'm not saying, if you have that strong belief right now, you should. That's where you should be. But in time, you will learn you're not that important. And your life is not about you. You know, what was that question they say, or that joke? You know how to make God laugh? Tell him your plans. I think that's kind of appropriate for this. Your life's not about you. Life is about that which is that thread that exists within us that will stay with us through life. And that life that we create on the outside is not necessarily who we are. It's just our vehicle for how we come through. That's a lack of a better way to say that. We're not in control. Certainly we feel that right now, don't we? If it isn't this, if it's not a virus, it'll be a car accident. It'll be challenges in life. It'll be a pregnancy that we didn't want. It will be a substance abuse issue. There is endless. We're not in control of that. We are not in control, and as we try, but control comes from something deeper, something deeper. And the final thing, we're going to die. All this will go away. Thich Nhat Hanh has something, the 5 remembrances. Look at it. It is included in there. There is disease, and you will succumb to disease. There is death. You will die. It's hard to think about, but that is. But here's what I want. I think if we understand that death does happen, it makes our life much more valuable. I'm not going to say anything more about that. If you're interested in learning more about these, I'm happy to provide you resources. Let's go back to the fathering. Critical dominating father. Try to connect with kids, but through traditional male force, dominating. Okay? So this is a king, a prince disguised as a, it's a prince disguised as a king. He's not really a king because he still has strong needs that need to be met. So therefore he dominates and says, this is how you will be. You're going to act this way as a boy. Passive father, not enough strength. Not enough strength, not conviction. Therefore, he's indulgent, non-parental. He's a friend. He wants his kids to like him. That's a passive father. The addicted man is the victim. He is a victim. He wants people to feel sorry for him, to take care of him, because he does not have that ability. He is powerless to his addiction. The violent man feels very isolated, Oftentimes, this is a really important concept. Violence happens sometimes because we feel on the outside. A father's violence may come because he doesn't understand, he doesn't feel part of. And I'm not saying that he said that poor him, he doesn't feel a part and therefore he's violent. I am saying he needs to figure that out. That his violence, though, is an expression of that lack of connection. It's a desperate attempt to gain power within the family because he knows there's something happening here in the family and I don't feel a part of it. Well, find a way to get to immerse and get connected into that. That's why we become violent. It's very interesting. The orphan archetype. So Plotkin talks about this one as well. In that same book that I referenced earlier. Begins to take hold of our lives the first time we feel let down by caregivers who have been less than perfect in their caregiving, which is inevitable for all of us. At that moment, we feel forsaken. The experience of abandonment, though, is a catalyst, perhaps an indispensable one, for the full emergence of the ego. We're all abandoned. We don't get our needs met fully. We are let go. We are orphaned. And instead of becoming victim to that, perhaps we can use that. Especially as kings, we see that, and we can help our youth to utilize that and become their own parent, become their own king, become more themselves rather than staying victim to, I didn't get my needs met and therefore I'm less than. Interesting concept. So, do you know your own wounding? Can you remember? Were you wounded by one of the outlaw father or the diminished father? Can you remember? Are you willing to remember? You may not be able to right now. Don't try, but just be open that when you're in a safe place, when you're in a good place in life, and all of a sudden this stuff starts coming back to you, it doesn't mean that life is bad. And it doesn't mean you should be medicated from it, but rather it's an invitation to go, oh yeah, that which I put way out here, when this happened, I put it way out here, I can now draw it into me and say, I'm willing to remember. And turn my wounding into a sacred wounding, such that it's transformative for me, and I then stand up and become who I am. Anybody willing to mention a little bit about, or talk a little bit about anything that has struck them, or in particular their own wounding?
I thought about how when just talking about it in regards to different dads, I look at a lot of males that are like involved in gang activity that have children, and they never leave that prince stage, even though they're thinking they're kings because of their involvement of the gangs.
Yes.
That hits hard in a lot of urban communities where you keep having the recycle pattern of boys not ever growing up, but thinking that they're men because of what they've seen or what they've experienced.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think it starts, that understanding is really important. And I think what we need to do is also have compassion at the same time for them and say, wow, they're trying to get a need met. They're still in that gang because they're still trying to get a need met. Wow. But
right. And I think that's,
you can pull them through it too. So go ahead.
I think like what I've noticed in regards to that is once ex-gang members come out of gangs or out of prison and stuff, and they go back and try to mentor these kids, I think they actually understand that and have that compassion of saying like, this is what I didn't have growing up, so this is what I want to give back to you. But at the same time, they have to provide that balance of the gang life and the life outside of the gang so that nobody's getting lost or killed for unnecessary reasons. So I think that's where a lot of challenges come into play for those type of men.
Yeah. And tell me how to pronounce your first name.
Kanisha.
Kanisha. Kanisha, that's one of my goals here is so that perhaps somebody can hear this and take this understanding to those situations.
Right.
To a situation where there is someone, and explain this to him, and he goes, oh, okay, I understand why I've been doing what I'm doing, and maybe I have an opportunity now to make a different choice. Thank you for bringing
that. Would be awesome if young men can have more positive role models and see things like that. That would be great.
Okay, so here's my charge. All of you out there in here, you have a mission now. I'm charging you. You need to take this out to a community, and you need to do this. You need to figure this out for who you are and for those who are in need, because there are men who are in great need of becoming kings. We need more kings. You can feel the emotion in my voice. I feel very passionately and very strongly because I feel so sorry for these men who have needs that didn't get met early on. They innocence was lost. They didn't get to explore. They didn't get to wander. They didn't have a man there who helped them to make sense of their wandering. I had that. I'm very happy to say I had Bill Plotkin, who wrote that book. He helped me to make sense of my wandering, and I am eternally grateful for that. But there have been many others, many others.
I think if I can chime in, you just hit the nail on the head with there have been many others. I think I would argue, and this isn't a well-developed thought because I'm thinking about it off the top of my head, but I think the idea of a king is an amalgam of men in our lives. So like there's no one person who can fill all of my needs or mentor me in all the ways in which I need mentoring. So I can choose this guy who can teach me about spirituality. I can use this guy who can teach me about business. I can use this guy who can teach me about being a better husband. But I can't find, I don't think, one guy who can teach me about spirituality, business, and being a good husband. I need to pick my role models and create that king.
That's a great model.
I need to aspire to become a king.
Yeah.
Maybe with the idea that in some way, shape, or form, I'm always going to fall just a little bit short.
That's a great model. I love that idea. I'd love for you to write something on that, Matthew. What are the rest of you thinking? What are you learning? What are you gaining? What are you unclear about?
My question would be, I think you may have answered it already, but who is it that says whether someone has become a king? Like,
yeah,
is it self-pronounced? Is it, who does it?
It's a good. I'm so glad you brought that up. It's one that I wrestle with. I see this out there in men's communities. What a man has been initiated, or who is it to say that you've been initiated? If you've been through this particular group, that means you're initiated. If you've been through if you've gone through a confirmation, you're initiated. I'm like, what is it that does? I think that's a really good question. I think it's a really good question, and it's easy to stand in judgment. I think the only thing that I come up with, because I actually did some work on this a while back, Kendra, and I actually I interviewed a number of men trying to understand this very idea. And for me, it became a man who has a vision beyond himself. And I think, as Matthew is saying, it may, the concept of king and may just, it may be, we may not be there we may not reside there as king 100% of the time. but that at least some of the time our needs are fulfilled and we're able to step into the role of king, of able to lead, able to reach down and help that. So I think that's a really good question. It's not, I don't know that it's for others to judge, Kendra. It's not necessarily, but it's an invitation maybe to live more than just the small self that you live when you're stuck in your addiction.
If you're calling yourself a king, you probably aren't one.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was thinking, Matthew, is
There's some
probably one of the traits of being a king is not calling yourself one.
Very good. Yeah, good one.
Do you think that having a child can sometimes initiate a boy becoming a king very quickly?
Yeah. What was it? In my syllabus? What is it that it says in my syllabus about the quote from? Is it Yeats? The child that the child is the father to the man. That by having a child, it's an invitation to step up and become the king, to become the leader, to become a realized man. Because you have someone staring back at you. You have a mirror. That's the hardest thing about being a kid, being a father. And Matthew's got, his son right there is a little bit young yet, but wait till he holds up the mirror to you all day long, and you don't want to look and see who you really are in all your frailty and as well as your strengths. Sometimes you don't want to see that, but that is what helps you to grow. You are absolutely right. That's a really good question, and I think that's it does, but I don't think there's not the only way. Because we can father lots of things. We can father community. We can father animals. We can father ideas and become writers, and then our writings are our children, so to speak.
Absolutely.
What are the questions, comments, challenges?
Would you be willing to go back to the slide with the graph, the circle?
Yep, of course. Are you kidding me? How well do you know me? Students in my class know that I talk about this all the time. I think it's one of my best tools for helping me to understand and for my students to understand life. But go ahead. Yes, I love.
We all suspect that you have a tattoo of this on your back. You just haven't showed it yet.
Yes.
I guess my response to this, my reaction to this is I don't know how old this is, how old of an idea this is, but I'm probably one of the older people in this class, and I've got a father who's in his, he's a baby boomer and he's retired, and a few years ago he confided in me that he never liked his job, and he just did it because he knew he was good at it, and he knew that it was going to be something that would provide for a family. So that idea of the wanderer and the apprentice seems somewhat generational, and I see this with his brothers too. He was the youngest, but like all of the people in that age group, my friends' dads, none of them really seem to have taken jobs that they liked, so that apprenticeship wasn't chosen. More often than not, it was kind of prescribed to them. So I don't know. This seems like a relatively new modern concept that's more applicable to my generation and younger. But
I might frame it a different way, Matthew, and to say that there were generations in which we skipped that. We skipped that partially because we had a generation of men who were not here. they weren't allowed to necessarily go there. They just had to do what was necessary when you have to go and work, when you have to work on the farm, because that's what's expected, because there's a need that you step up into that. You don't get to necessarily choose. You don't get to wander. And that is suppressed. That is suppressed. And therefore you just go, you become something, but I don't think that fully realize that you're really doing all of this. Now, keep in mind also that this is a model. This is just a framework for helping us to understand. But I think that there are times when we all circle back through various parts of this. And I think that's when people realize that they can't cross over. We need to look at, where was your innocence violated? Were you abused? Were you allowed to explore? You know, and that we have to go back and connect with that part in order to get this. And that you are right. And in this, it's not we could get really judgy about this and say, hey, you didn't do this, and therefore you're not a real man. And I don't think that's the whole point. It's an invitation to understanding where the difficulty may be in your life, the challenges in your life, because you don't feel as if you can really become this master.
It might be a factor, Matthew, too, of like my father's 82. They grew up in families whose parents lived through the Depression, and their upbringing was not to have any of this exploration. They really were brought up to survive. And like I think Dr. Risman said, I think that skips over a generation. If your parents were born in the 60s, they may have had a completely different upbringing.
Yeah, they were born in the 40s, but I guess I even just look at my grandfather, who's a salesman. I mean, I doubt that he had any sort of love or passion for ice machines, but it was something that, you know, put food on the table and paid the mortgage. And
but it doesn't mean that he wasn't initiated by it.
yeah,
See,
I just don't know if he had that same.
Yeah, I think you could have that experience though and not grow from it, or you could have the experience and you could embrace it and grow from it. That's
Sure. I guess even just a generation before that, my great grandfather was a leather. He would make saddles and belts and stuff like that in South Dakota. And it's like, I doubt he had, his father probably did. I don't know what his father did, but it was probably something that he just learned without that opportunity to, you know, do the wandering in the cocoon. Like, I doubt he ever went out and tried to figure out what he really loved and was passionate about. He probably was just told, you're going to be a leather worker, and that was it.
Yeah. And that's okay. It doesn't, I think that you can, you know, it's not necessarily about your job or your craft. The other thing is, has been pointed out to me, somebody's mission may be just who they are as a resident in that neighborhood. They are a light in that neighborhood who people can come to, people can trust, whatever. There's lots of ways to express purpose. And I think we do that career or job, but I don't think it's necessarily, it's not limited to that. Okay, I think we've reached, we're done, aren't we not? Yes, we are. So thank you for participating today. And I am going to record, this is recorded, so if anybody needs a copy of this, it will be in the content of Blackboard, but if anybody else is looking for it who's joined us today, I'm happy to share that. Please look forward to seeing my integrative healthcare for COVID, so that maybe you can gain something from that as well. And then I will be in touch. I'll send you the Fathers and Fathering class an email updating you on where we're at, what is expected going forward, etc. All right. Thanks.
Cool. Have a good one, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Stay safe. Make good choices. Fierce choices.
Okay.